What I'd like to do today is tie an Adams, probably the all-time most popular fish catching dry flies ever. So really cool fly. Has some neat things about it. It has a dry fly wing on it that has different colors to it with the grizzly hackle tips. It also mixes some grizzly and brown hackle together, which a few other flies do as well, but it makes it kind of buggy looking. So I'm going to show you my version of an Adams. It's pretty close to the standard, but there's one slight difference. In the vise I have a just standard dry fly hook. This is a Tiemco 900 BL, BL standing for barbless. And to that I'm going to attach some 6/0 black thread. And realizing that things are pretty blurry, I'm going to put my glasses on. Oh, that's better. Okay. So we'll run that thread right down the hook shank. Then we're going to bring it back up so it's about a third of the way back from the eye of the hook, because that's where we're going to tie our wings on. And we want to make sure that we have enough room in front of that hook to wind some hackle and also finish off the head of the fly. Now, at one time, dry fly hackles only came on necks, we call them. Hackle necks, the back of this is the back of the neck of a rooster and down his upper back. And, you know, when we look at these, they were not real good quality. They were short and had long fibers, and so tying small dry flies with these things was pretty difficult. At one time, this would have been considered a pretty good dry fly cape, but compared to the newer ones, they're not very good at all. But what these older capes are good for is they have these rounded off tips on their feathers, and they make really good wings for Adams. So I happened to come across this in some materials. A friend of mine gave it to me. His father passed away and left a whole bunch of fly tying materials, and Kevin didn't tie flies, so he gave this to me. So I'm going to pick out a couple of these feathers that we will use for wings on our Adams. So I picked out these two guys here, and they were just close to each other. There's no specific reason for them. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the natural curve of the feather and the natural curve of the other feather, and I'm going to put the outside of those curves together so that if we were to hold these feathers together, they would separate a little bit like that, okay? And I'm going to even the tips up here as best I can, and then I'm going to measure on there the length of the wing. I'm going to measure on the hook shank. I'm going to grab that and stroke these fibers back out of the way. And we'll check again and see, yeah, that's pretty close. Could maybe be a tad shorter, but so that's pretty close to the length of our hook shank. So this is going to keep them together, bring them up here, we'll tie them in, and we'll see what good. That doesn't look too bad. Make sure they're tied in good. Run it down here, and we will trim off these feathers. We're then going to stand these up. We'll come back up, so we're right at the base of those feathers. Stand them up. Take a few turns right in front of them. So that they're standing straight up, and then we can separate them a little bit. There's the wings on our Adams. I mean, if you want, you could do a couple of these figure eights in through there to kind of lock them in place, I guess. And And I don't mind if there's a few extra fibers sticking out like this, because we're going to wind a bunch of hackle around there and add a whole bunch more fibers to it. So we're just going to come down so our thread is about maybe halfway up the hook shank, and what we're going to use for tails. Now the traditional one called for some fibers, individual fibers off a hackle feather like this, from a grizzly hackle and a brown hackle, and kind of mixed together. I like to use some moose body hair, black moose body hair for the tail on this. So we'll just get a few of these fibers, and we'll trim these off. So just a small group of fibers. We don't need that many, half a dozen at the most, maybe. We'll put these in a hair stacker, even them up. And then, once again, we're going to use the shank of the hook here as a kind of a guide as to how long we want to make them. So we'll move these, position this back here, switch hands, say, okay, I want to cut them off right about there. And I like to cut fibers off before I tie them onto the hook shank. Then I don't have to get in there with my scissors and try to cut things off and unintentionally cut other things off. So the last wrap or two here, I don't like to crank it down too much because it flares them out a bit. So a couple of, slacker wraps right at the end, and then just come forward a bit, and then you can tighten them down a bit again. So there is the moose body hair tail on our Adams. The next thing we do is we're going to put some dubbing on there, some gray fur, and I like to use this is called Hairtron. It's put out by the Hairline Company. It's rabbit fur that's been dyed gray, and then it's got some antron fibers on it. You can see those fibers, how they glisten. I just like the way this stuff ties. I just like to tie with this better than synthetic stuff, and that's why I use it. Not that the flies end up any better. I mean, there's people that say, oh, rabbit hair makes your flies sink. Well, I disagree with that. I got flies that float and float and float. So besides that, you can dry them out. Okay, what I like to do is, when I'm putting dubbing on, is I like to start up a little bit further up the hook than I want to be, and I just start it there and take my first 2 or 3 wraps going back down the hook shank, and that traps the ends of all those fibers in there. Then I start working my way forward. Now a lot of these traditional dry flies, Catskill style dry flies like an Adams, I'm going to put a bit more on there. They like to have a bit of a tapered body to them. It's like the natural mayflies do, I guess. And so you can kind of wind back over it itself and to build up a bit of a taper if you like. And we want to come up, not right up to the base of the wing, because we need space behind that wing to wrap some hackles. So we need to leave a bit of space behind it, and we also have quite a bit of space in front of it here to wind some hackles as well. Now to put hackle on this fly, what I prefer to use are saddle hackles. And the reason I like saddle hackles is that there's several reasons. These saddle hackles that have been bred for tying dry flies are excellent quality hackles for floating flies. They're nice and long. You get tons of flies out on one feather, and the center stems of saddle hackles tend to be much thinner than the center stems on neck hackles, and make it much easier to tie, I think. So we'll just prepare these feathers here. We're just going to even the ends up here a little bit. Get them pretty close. And then we're going to strip some fibers off the ends of that. And we're going to take the outside, or the shiny side of these feathers, which is the outside of the curve of that, and we're going to place that shiny side against the hook. And we're going Now, whenever I tie dry fly hackles on, I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a little bit of bare stem right there. And I like leaving that bare stem because when you tie hackles on the way I tie them on here, obviously when you stand them up, you know, the fibers are kind of pointing out along the length of the shank of the hook, and we don't want that. We want them perpendicular to the hook. And if you tie it right up tight here, the first half of wrap, you'll end up with a bunch of fibers sticking out at goofy angles. And but leaving that little bit of bare stem allows that feather to orient itself when you start wrapping. And I used to wrap these one at a time, but Jack Dennis got me going on wrapping two at a time like this. As long as you get them tied in at the same place and lined up good here, you can do them two at a time. And as you start turning, those feathers now will rotate so that the fibers now are at 90 degrees to the hook shank. So we'll take that first turn or so, we just use up that bare stem, and then we start to see the hackle appear. So we're going to take a couple of turns behind that wing. And we'll take a couple turns in front of the wings, and then we'll tie them off. Now, whenever I get in a situation like this and I want to tie something off, I like to hold the feathers up above the hook shank like this and tie them off. And the reason I like to do that is once they're tied off, I can sneak in there with my scissors, and now my scissors are cutting above the hook shank and not below it where my thread is. So we'll just see, we got a couple of extra fibers here, we'll just get rid of them. Watch that thread. Stroke everything back out of the way. Give it a few turns on here to finish up the head on this fly. And then we'll put a whip finish on. And this is the type of whip finish I like to use. Several people have shown me how to do it with my hands, and I just can't figure it out how to do it properly. So I use this machine, and I just find it very quick and easy to get done. A little bit of primping there. Hackle looking good. Get the wings out there. Get the tail perked up there. And there you have a dry fly Adams.